What an entrance for Mark Pope to his introductory press conference at Kentucky. Folks, it didn't win him any games, but it sure does make a great first impression.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome in to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Schade, and you are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every day. Yes, into the off season as well. We are not going anywhere, folks. Going to be with you 5 days a week from now, all the way until the start of the next college basketball season. I want to thank all of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you, you can join us on our Discord channel. It is free to join. There is a link in the show notes. You can come hang out with us 24/7. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball, folks, is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Isaac, Mark Pope was introduced to Big Blue Nation, and he showed up in style. We'll talk about that. Jon Scheyer and Duke, they have a busy offseason ahead, busier than they've had in the past. We'll talk about that, as well as some big names that have committed into the transfer portal. Jam-packed episode here. But Isaac, let's start, as we've started most of the shows this last week, pretty much since the NCAA tournament concluded, talking about Kentucky basketball in some capacity. We're talking about John Calipari. We're talking about Scott Drew. Now we're talking about Mark Pope, the new head coach of the Kentucky Wildcats. He is introduced at his press conference on Sunday afternoon in Lexington, Kentucky. So much fun. The environment, everything just looked like an absolute blast. You could tell that BBN, they may have been a little bit hesitant about Mark Pope, and many of them I'm sure still are. I'm sure they still are, but man, that place was absolutely rocking, packed house at Rupp Arena. And Mark Pope wasn't the first person off the bus. It was the entire majority of the 1996 national championship team came off the bus before Mark Pope. He comes off carrying that championship. Of course, he was the team captain on that 1996 team. What an incredible way to introduce yourself to Big Blue Nation, to help kind of quiet some of the doubters. He had a phenomenal press conference outside of that, said all of the right things, but just from an introduction perspective, not sure you could have done more to sell yourself to this community and to this fan base than what he did in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I obviously anyone who's there knows his connection to that team and what it is. But Andy, just that image of those guys being with him says we believe in our teammate, that he can do for the next generation of Wildcats, for this generation of Big Blue Nation, what Rick Pitino did for us as we were winning. You know, obviously Pope wasn't part of the 98 championship, but as we as an institution won 2 out of 3 national championships in 96 and 98. And so, Andy, I think just even that immediate visual image there is everything they needed to do. What I don't know who conceived of that idea, if that was Pope himself or Barnhart or whomever it was. Andy, what a brilliant stroke to introduce your new head basketball coach and reintegrate him to Lexington.
And I think among the many things that I think it helped sell was that one of the things that you and I have talked about already a few times after kind of finding out that Mark Pope was going to take this job, which is that he gets it. Like, he understands the pressure, the media circus, the difference that Kentucky basketball has to other programs. Like, he understands that this is not just going to be your normal press conference, going to be your normal introduction. Like, he knows that it's different. He knows that it just means more at Kentucky, that it's a full different brand. And I think among the many reasons that Big Blue Nation should feel good about the Mark Pope hire, like, that is really at the top of the list to me, is that he totally understands what it means to be the head coach in Lexington from a perspective of understanding the fan base and understanding the pressure and the significance of being the coach there. Like, I think that cannot be understated when you look at some of the other candidates that they had in mind that that Big Blue Nation may have had in mind, like guys like Sean Miller or Bruce Pearl or whomever that maybe even didn't get contacted, or even the guys who did, like Scott Drew and Danny Hurley. It's like, you want somebody who totally wants to be here, who is unquestionably loyal and dedicated and passionate about being the basketball coach at Kentucky, but who also knows what they're getting into, who isn't going to be shell-shocked by how many people show up to your introductory press conference, who isn't going to be just completely blown away by the reaction of the fan base when you lose that game that you're not supposed to lose. Like, Pope is going to be ready for that, for better or worse. Like, he knows what that is. And this kind of thing where he's interacting with the crowd and he's getting everybody excited and juiced up, and he seems to just be having an absolute blast. Like, that to me tells you that he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's getting into, and he's not only ready for it, he is freaking excited about it. Like, he is pumped up to be the person in charge of this, to be the person who is leading this program into their next level. And like, whether you're concerned about the lack of tournament success or whatever it is about his resume that is bothering Big Blue Nation, which there are things that I can understand being concerned about, his excitement level to be in this job should kind of outweigh those concerns. At least it would for me.
And Andy, it's funny with all that you said. I remember that we began Friday morning. We did a live show right after the hiring was made official. And I think our cold open was something to the effect of like, Big Blue Nation is shook or whatever, because at that point, most people were like, oh, Chicken Little, the sky's falling apart.
Right.
And we got a comment, at least one comment on that video over the weekend that was like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. You've got this all wrong. We are not shook. Some kind of like righteous indignation at it. And it's like, yeah, because now Big Blue Nation has worked themselves around it. They've come around it. They've put themselves in the headspace of whether like faking themselves into believing it or truly believing it now.
Yeah.
It feels like just over the weekend, Big Blue Nation has rallied around this. I'm sure not everyone has, but I think a lot of people have come to embrace it. We've seen that from our own Locked On Kentucky host, Lance Daw, right? Like, that's kind of his story that the narrative he's been painting over the weekend is like, I'm all in on this thing. Yeah. And Andy, I think that's what you got to do if you're Big Blue Nation, right? Like, whether it's going to be successful or not, that's the way to approach it. Andy, you talked about how it wasn't just him, the way they got off the bus and the actual introduction, but some of what Coach Pope said himself. Let's work our way through a couple of these comments because they're very interesting. I'll do two game-related ones right out of the gate here. He says, if we can find our way into this Maui tournament, would anyone come? And also, anyone here down for a game versus St. John's? Andy, obviously, we saw over the weekend, Coach Pitino has been a vocal advocate for Coach Pope, even going so far as to pledge his own money to help in the NIL efforts. Oh, how great would a St. John's Kentucky game be?
Yeah, it's an absolute blast of a game. And I don't know if Mark Pope is just trying to gas up the crowd. Like, I don't know if he's had serious conversations with Pitino about this. Obviously, it's very likely that they have been in contact in some capacity. Clearly, Pitino advocated for him to get this job. I think we didn't see this game last year, in part because, Pitino just got in the job. And I don't know that Pitino and Calipari really wanted to play each other, but I have a feeling that Pitino would like to play Mark Pope. And Mark Pope is clearly trying to get that game going. So hopefully they can make that one work. That would be a blast of a game. And same with getting Kentucky into the Maui Invitational. I think that'd be really cool to see Mark Pope try to get them into at least a tournament, if not into Maui. But again, it just goes back to Mark Pope. Like, he knows what the crowd wants to hear. He knows how to get them going and get them riled up. But it is going to be a matter of also kind of backing some of this stuff up. And that kind of goes into some of the other quotes he talked about. He had Travis Perry, one of the committed Kentucky recruits who is from the state of Kentucky. He had him stand up. He got a big ovation. He made a comment about how I don't think he's going anywhere. I think he's going to play here. But again, you got to be able to back that up. You got to keep Travis Perry committed instead of just talking about it in a press conference. And beyond that, he also talked about who they're recruiting and their offensive style. One of his other quotes that I loved is he said, my team last year made the second most threes in all of college basketball, but at Kentucky, we don't come in second. And I love that because he's saying we're going to try to shoot and make the most three-pointers of anybody in college basketball next year. And that is welcome news, I imagine, to many folks in Big Blue Nation who saw Calipari kind of finally start to adapt to the three-point revolution last year. It sounds like Pope is going to bring what he brought at BYU and what helped make them so successful last year, which was a barrage of three-pointers. So he's out here promising offense with a lot of three-point shots, promising to try to get some fun games on the schedule, promising to keep some of these recruits. He also, sticking on the recruiting trail, he said, we're talking to all the guys on the current team, all the guys that were being recruited, and just about every single person in the portal. We're going to try to find the guys that fit here and the way that we play. So he's out here making a lot of promises, as he should. He also said, basically, I know the pressure here. I know that I should, in theory, temper expectations, but I'm not going to. We come to Kentucky to win championships. So, he talked the talk, and he's obviously got to walk the walk, and hopefully his enthusiasm, his excitement will get him to the point where if the first year maybe doesn't go quite according to plan, that he's still got a bit of a leash to kind of keep going. I think that he will, but he's not somebody who's afraid or shying away from what he knows is the pressure at Lexington and what he knows he needs to do. And he got a lot of people fired up thinking he's going to be able to knock it out of the park and get it done.
And Andy, it's only April 15th.
Yeah.
We got a long way to go until all these things tip off, but it is very interesting to watch. Let me give three quick, one of the things that we're also watching is in this whole Kentucky, Arkansas, BYU love triangle. What are all these players going to do? So three quick ones that have cropped up over the weekend. Aly Khalifa enters the portal from BYU, has a do not contact designation on his transfer portal entry, which almost universally 99.9999% of the time means I've got my school that I'm going to. Yep. Don't holler at me. Andy, it's almost a no-brainer. He's coming to Lexington, as you had said, a perfect center in Mark Pope's offense. Dallin Hall from BYU has also entered the portal. To our knowledge and the best we've been able to dig down on it, he does not have a DNC. So we'll look to see if Coach Pope's going to try to bring him to Lexington or not. Had, a strong year last year. And then also Big Z's Vonimir Avicic is in the portal from Kentucky. And so the question, Andy, you just talked about, we're going to try to keep recruiting these guys. Could Coach, I think we're going to have a little tug of war here maybe between Coach Pope and Coach Cal at Arkansas. So that's going to be a really interesting one to watch, as well as his front court teammate Aaron Bradshaw from last year, who was in the portal. We obviously already know that. And so we'll see what happens there. Could he get any of these guys back? Adou Thiero, he entered the portal before Coach Cal left for Arkansas. So we'll just keep our eyes on all this, Andy. Going to be a lot of fun to see. Now, Andy, let's go from one blue blood to another. Duke entered this offseason way over budgets on scholarship commitments for next season. But now the math is starting to check out a little better. How they pulling that off? We'll unpack it in just a second. Right after I tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Thankfully, it's not just another job board at LinkedIn. They help you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might just be open to that perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong spot. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire a professional like the professionals on LinkedIn. Post your job for free right now at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Each college basketball program, unless they're under probation, gets 13 scholarships every academic year, which, by the way, little known thing, or maybe it is a big known thing. It's not a 4-year commitment. These scholarships are just year-to-year commitments, folks. Keep that in mind. As for Duke, as of, several weeks ago, they were way over budget, not 13, 14, 15, or 16. They had 17 scholarships if everyone returned and if everyone came in. Only Ryan Young had exhausted his eligibility. Even Jeremy Roach has a 5th year of eligibility should he want to choose to use it. Looking at the outline of it too, it was a very young potential. Even Jalen Blakes was the only rising senior along with Jeremy Roach as a 5th year. 5 in the rising junior class, 4 in the rising sophomore class, and 6 incoming freshmen alphabetically: Andy, Darren Harris, Isaiah Evans, Cooper Flagg, you might have heard of him, Patrick Mbanga, Khan Knipple, and Kaman Maluak. I haven't learned Mbanga's and come on's pronunciation correctly. We're going to have to do that before the basketball season, Andy. So if you're keeping score at home, again, that's 17 and you only get 13, meaning I passed math. You got to lose 4 somehow. So Andy, we already knew that Christian Reeves was in the portal. That's 1 down, 3 to go. We already knew that Mark Mitchell was in the transfer portal. 2 down, 2 to go. On Thursday, Tyrese Proctor announced he was returning. That doesn't help the budget any. But Andy, over the weekend, we've had lots of movement on the Duke front that is going to help Jon Scheyer breathe a little easier. I don't think he's breathing hard because he knew it would eventually get there, but that has now got Duke where they are under budget on their scholarships. Much better place. Andy, what happened?
Well, 2 announcements that we expected to happen. We knew Kyle Filipowski was likely going to the NBA draft. The odds of him returning for a 3rd year seemed astronomically low. He's mocked all over the first round of NBA mock drafts, so we expected him to be gone. Jared McCain, same situation. Both players are in the NBA draft process. That puts you down at even on scholarships if you're Duke. And I think you expected that to happen. So like you said, Jon Scheyer probably wasn't sweating this too much because he figured some of those guys were going to end up out the door. And then Jalen Blakes, that rising senior on this roster, he has entered the transfer portal. He announced that on Saturday via Instagram, had been at Duke for the past 3 years. In fact, now means that Jeremy Roach is the only player left at Duke who played for Mike Krzyzewski. Wow. Blakes was in that conversation as well, but is now, again, entering the transfer portal. So now after all of this, after the dust has settled here in mid-April, and the roster churn for Duke has already happened in a lot of ways with the transfer portal entrances, the draft entrances, et cetera, Duke now sits 1 under budget. And we have heard and to be clear, unsubstantiated rumor at this point that Caleb Foster is planning to come back. If that happens, they will remain with 1 spot available. And so the question for Jon Scheyer and for Duke, it kind of depends on what do you want to do now? Do you want to go try to fill that final spot? How confident do you feel about Jeremy Roach staying in school? That's a big one right now, probably the biggest kind of hinge still left for the Blue Devils program. We haven't seen Jon Scheyer navigate the portal all that much because he hasn't really had to. But at this point now, with a team that looks like it's going to be very young, with all these freshmen coming in, does Scheyer want to go the portal route to fill another spot? Does he expect any more players to potentially depart? Like it feels like Duke the dust has settled a little bit, but there's still quite a few questions about what this roster is going to look like next season.
Yeah, Andy, I'm right with you on that. Because let's say that Jeremy Roach doesn't come back. Let's say that Jeremy Roach is out. You got a really, really young team at that point. Of the 11 committed scholarships you have, that'd be 6 freshmen that we just named, 3 sophomores, Caleb Foster, Sean Stewart, TJ Power. And obviously we wait to see with specificity on those guys, and just 2 juniors, Tyrese Proctor and Jaden Shutt. Again, we wait to hear on Shutt what he'll do. But Andy, if I'm Jon Scheyer and I got literally no seniors or no COVID seniors, I feel like I got to use at least what, like, I know Tyrese Proctor is gonna be your captain and your leader there. Yeah. But I mean, he's the only one that I feel good about as a like a team leader kind of guy. And so it feels like you almost have to go use one, even if it's not for a guy that's going to be like overwhelmingly contributing on the court, somebody that's a great locker room captain kind of guy. Like, I know, like, I hear from a lot of Dukies that are like, I'm kind of fed up with Jeremy Roach. And I'm like, really? Why? and I get it that every now and then he's not the same level of production all the time that like a Flip or a McCain is. But what Jeremy Roach brings as a leader is unbelievable. And so, Andy, I think if Roach decides to come back, which for college basketball's sake, I hope he does. I love it when we get these names back, right, that can bring stability to the sport. I truly think that he will, and that probably he should. And if so, then I think Coach Scheyer has everything you need, because he gets his backcourt back and 2 upperclassmen leaders. And at that point, I would not use that 13th scholarship, as many programs in America we're seeing do now, where they don't use all the way to the end of the bench, because then it's guys that are just going to get upset and frustrated and ultimately leave anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's the big question for Duke is how do you want to just add a player just to add a player, or do you want to find somebody who fills an intentional role, whether it's on or off the court? And, I think I think a lot of people think of these blue blood programs of like, you can't add a player in the portal who then becomes like a veteran leader on the team because they haven't grown up in that system. And I can understand that argument. I would point to like Antonio Reeves taking on a leadership role for Kentucky, despite having been somebody who transferred into that program. Perhaps a better example in terms of team success might be Tristan Newton at UConn, who took on a leadership role. Now, I think Sanogo was probably more the leader in Newton's first year, but Newton was very clearly the leader this year. And so it can be done. I'm curious if Duke does lose Roach. Not only they're losing, obviously, a ton of production in the backcourt, they're losing that leader, that veteran, just kind of experience, and that guy who's been in the system for, since the Coach K days. So, roster-wise, I don't know that they desperately need guards as much as they need maybe a little bit more veteran size in the front court, with Filipowski leaving, with Ryan Young graduating. So I'm curious if they will look to find like a veteran big man who can step in, maybe not a 30-minute per game guy, but somebody who can step into a role there. But yeah, that's the question of like, do you try to find somebody who you think can be a vocal leader? Is that going to go over well with players who've already been in the system? Do you find somebody who's more quiet, but is just somebody who can contribute on the floor? Like what exactly are you looking for? And again, this is mostly with Roach leaving. I think you're right. If Roach comes back, you may be good with what you got, and you just say, hey, we're going to be young, but we got Roach who can lead this team. We got Proctor who can help lead this team. And we just feel good about the talent that we have on this team, that we're going to make everything work piece by piece. But I think if Roach leaves, you probably got to look at some way to add some kind of veteran to that team and figure out what role that person might have.
Completely agree, Andy. And that's, I know it's like, in this day and age now, it's like, it's frustrating for fan bases because it's so hard to know, and you got all the NBA draft stuff, but it is kind of fun in some ways of like, man, what's going to happen? And I can't wait to find out. So we'll keep our eyes peeled.
All right, Isaac, Brad Underwood, he nabs his Terrence Shannon Jr. replacement in Kylan Boswell out of Arizona, one of many big-time transfer portal commitments that we got over the weekend. We're going to break all of them down coming up in just a second. But first, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, it's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So you can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. And if you're getting ahead of yourself and looking towards the 2025 National Championship, that Duke team that we just talked about currently have 1,100 odds to win the National Championship. Behind them is Kansas at plus 1,200, UConn at plus 1,300, going for that three-peat, Alabama at plus 1,600, along with North Carolina and Houston, all at plus 1,600. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Isaac, I want to talk some transfer portal commitments. And you and I have kind of gone back and forth a little bit of trying to figure out what to prioritize with regards to the numerous players entering the transfer portal, players committing to other schools in the transfer portal, NBA draft declarations, players returning to school. There are literally just headline after headline after headline. College basketball is in a 24/7 news cycle, more than I think it's ever been before. Do not mistake what I'm saying as a complaint at all. It is not. It is very, very fun to be following everything going on in the sport. But we've kind of determined that when a player picks a new school, that's kind of the best time to be able to talk about that and their fit and what it looks like for that roster and everything. So we picked quite a few over this weekend of players who are finally kind of making those decisions. We've seen a bunch of players enter the portal, not very many pick schools yet, but we had some big ones over the weekend. We'll start with Kylan Boswell, going from Arizona to Illinois. Second big addition, mind you, for Brad Underwood in Illinois. We haven't talked about Trey White yet. Trey White, who began his career at USC, spent last year at Louisville, now heading over to Illinois as well. Two big-time offensive players. Boswell certainly kind of in that mold of Terrence Shannon. I don't think he's not quite at that level, certainly not from a consistency perspective. That was his biggest issue at Arizona, but not a super elite three-point shooter, but a great driver, a player who I think could really thrive in Underwood's system. And certainly as a very, very young player for his age. I think there's a potential for this to really work out for him. He's also an Illinois native, so he's going back home, chance to play in his hometown, in his home area for Brad Underwood's offense. I think this is a really nice fit for him.
I think so too. And Andy, in some ways, like from a physical stature standpoint, White profiles a lot more similarly to Terrence Shannon than does Boswell. And I think that's the key, is the thing going back to what we saw from Boswell this year, is I think you and I really thought he would be kind of a lead dog, a big guy for Arizona. And really, Caleb Love was the one that came in. Obviously, he's the Pac-12 player of the year, was the one that outshone Boswell. But if we can see Boswell get some more consistency for Coach Underwood, I think they'll be in a great place. Really interested to see what both of these guys bring to the table there in Champaign.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun to see how that all shakes out. And a couple other transfer portal names that we saw. I'm just going to rattle off a few of them. And Isaac, you take it where you want to take it there. Milos Uzan goes from Oklahoma to Houston. Feels like a really nice fit for him defensively in Houston's system. One of two Oklahoma players to commit over the weekend, the other being Javion McCollum, goes from Oklahoma to Georgia Tech to join Damian Stoudemire's team there. We saw Frankie Collins go from Arizona State to TCU, helps replace the loss of a handful of TCU guards, including Micah Peavy. And Micah Peavy, another commit, as well, as he goes over to Georgetown. I wonder if they're going to have any conversations about that game, that it seemed like that Georgetown should have won that one. And they did not. I never miss an opportunity to bring up that game here on the podcast. A couple other ones. Tyler Perkins goes from Penn to Villanova. And JP, and you pronounced his name earlier, and JP Pegues going from Furman to Auburn. Really nice addition for Bruce Pearl's team. Isaac, any of those that you want to kind of grab on and talk about here?
Yeah, I want to both Pegues and Milos Uzan. So I'll bookend those two that you did. I honestly, Andy, I know like Uzan's shooting numbers weren't great at Oklahoma this year, had been up over 40% from three his freshman year, fell under 30% this year, which is true, probably somewhere in the middle. But I think this is a great get for the Cougars, and for me, propels them probably right. I mean, they were floating probably in most people's way too earlies, which we need to do, by the way, Andy. We haven't done ours yet. Sometime this week we should hit that. But they were floating in most people's top fives, but I think this is probably going to jump Houston maybe right up to the top of the preseason pile as we look at that. JP Pegues coming over from Furman. We remember two postseasons ago, when Furman beat anybody. Was it Virginia? That's my memory, I think. Anyway, this year, Pegues at Furman had 18.4 points, 4.3 boards, and just shy of 5 assists a game. He said, quote, I forget which outlet he was talking to, "I chose Auburn because of their conviction and the vivid vision that they had for me. I also love how they operate a family-oriented environment, big priority for me. Lastly, Auburn is a winning program and one of the best defenses in the country." I love hearing a player, Andy, critically say that about the defense. And so I think just will be a big-time get in terms of just another guard that Bruce Pearl's going to love to have in his stable.
One of the other things we like to talk about, too, is not only the guys committing in the transfer portal, but guys staying in school. And we'll quote Trilly Donovan on Twitter. I know many of you probably follow him. And he says, "Sometimes the best gets are the ones you already have." And certainly in this era, especially when you lose a player, or when you think you're losing a player because they enter the portal and then they choose to come back, it is the best feeling in the world. And I know Stanford fans are so excited to have Maxime Raynaud back in the mix, the big man. And folks, for those of you who listened to Friday's episode of Locked On College Basketball, we gave you a tip. I shouldn't say we. Isaac gave you a tip that Raynaud is probably going to return to Stanford. So you guys would have known that ahead of time if you'd been checking out that show. But this is a huge get for Kyle Smith, a huge return for Kyle Smith's team. Caden Shedrick also returning to Texas to use his COVID eligibility. Had some injury stuff last year for Ronnie Terry's team, but a huge piece for that team, particularly on the defensive end as a rim protector. And then Silas DeMary staying at Georgia as well. Just a couple of guys, trio of guys there that are coming back to their schools. And you love to see it. You love to see that continuity, something that obviously we're not seeing as often in college basketball, but it still happens, and it deserves to be celebrated when it does, especially somebody like Raynaud coming back to Stanford. That's a huge, huge deal
Oh, big time. Very big time. Very big time. Okay, Andy, I was looking while you were talking. That's what I thought. Pegues is the one that hit the 3 that beat Virginia in that tournament 2 years ago. So I was like, I feel like I'm not crazy thinking about this, but
you might be
great stuff there. A couple last things, some draft declarations of big names we want to mention. Donovan Clingan, you know him, you saw him helping win the national championship there for UConn. Is in the draft. Hunter Salas, who started at Gonzaga, played this year at Wake Forest. I'm curious to see who's going to be. Will Wake get a 4th straight like big time guard in the transfer? We'll wait to see. But he has kept his eligibility, so we'll wait to see. Andy, I think you and I are both of the mind that ultimately Salas will stay in the draft. And then this is a guy that didn't play college basketball this year, but is a name that you probably remember because we tracked his movement up until he did not come to college basketball. He was a great high school player, and that's Trenton Flowers is off to the draft as well. Well, Mr. Patton, it's Monday, and we are rolling. We've got about 15 days left until the transfer portal closes. As a reminder, you just got to be in the portal. You don't have to have committed out of it by May 1st, folks. So we'll keep tabs on that for another 2 weeks. And then right on through the summer is obviously like Johnny Furphy committed to Kansas. What was that, like July of last year, Andy? So all summer long, folks, stick right here with us. If you're not part of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community, as Andy said earlier, come do it. It's free. It's in the show notes to come be part of that. Link is. If you haven't subscribed to the show on video and audio, do that too to make sure you stay up with us. If there's wild breaking news like there was last Sunday, holy cow, Coach Cal, it's been a week. It feels like a year that he left Kentucky. But when there's breaking news, you want to have hit that bell notification so that you get notified when we go live. As always, apologies to that lawyer family. Man, maybe next year, Fletcher, we'll see. And let's go Wildcats, and until tomorrow, peace.